Well, good afternoon. It's Pastor Gregory with Applington Evangelical Presbyterian Church right here in downtown Applington, Iowa. And I've been thinking a lot about all of the suffering that we've been going through, and I've been contemplating about how long it's going to be. You probably have as well. Or not just that, but perhaps uh, how difficult is it going to become? Uh, it must be going to get worse. It seems like it's going to be worse before it gets better, and that bothers everyone, I'm sure. And we can have different kinds of responses. We can be angry. We can shake our fists at God if we want, if we're so moved, and I hope we don't. We can be frustrated. We can be exhausted from the trials. All kinds of things could be our responses to what we're going through right now with this pandemic. Well, the last couple of times I've spoken, I've mentioned that God is sovereign. He is providential. He is the King of kings and the Lord of lords. He's the creator of all that there is. And he knows everything about his creation, including the time when we would live. He knows the place where we would live. He knows the trials that are part of our lives. There's just nothing that he doesn't know. And not only that, but when we are believers in Jesus Christ, when we have repented of our sins and believed Jesus Christ and been forgiven, if this is true of us, then we know that he is also our shepherd. We studied that just a little bit last time in Psalm 23. I wanted to give us just a little bit more of the perspective, hopefully from God's view and not just my view, from the Bible. One of my favorite passages in the Bible is Deuteronomy chapter 8. It describes the account of the Israelites having completed their 40-year journey through the wilderness with no place to call their own, eating manna the whole time, or at least most of the time. So they had some tough times. They were going through trials. And after 40 years, you might think that they could shake their fist at God and say, why have you done this? Look what you're doing to me. You're being mean. You're not a very good father. You're not a very good God. They could be doing all that kind of that thing, and they could have some really bad reactions. But Moses uh, helped put things into perspective for them in Deuteronomy chapter 8. And he wrote these words that I think that are applicable to us today, even if we're not the Israelites, because the fact is God deals with his people much the same because he doesn't change. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. His character is always perfect in every way. He is not mean. He is not vindictive. He does not hate his people. And so it's important for us to understand a little bit about his perspective, about God's perspective of these trials we're going through. Deuteronomy 8, verses 2 and 3, Moses wrote these words: Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the desert these 40 years. Now, why did he do that? To humble you and to test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commandments. Well, I'm going to just take a moment here and remind us that God knows everything. He knows everything about us. He knows our hearts. He knows the place where we go. There's nowhere where we can go where he's not. So when these words are recorded with us, and we are told that he tests us in order to know what was in your heart, it's in order for us to know what's in our hearts. And that's the real key here. He wants us to see us for whom we really are on the inside. So he says he humbles us and tests us in order to know what was in our hearts, whether or not we would keep his commands. Then it goes on, he humbled you, causing you to hunger and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your fathers had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Your clothes did not wear out and your feet did not swell during these 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you. Now, when we think of discipline, we often think that it's just a matter of spankings, perhaps, or punishment of some kind. But that's not what discipline is. Discipline is helping us to get back to the standard, and the standard is God's righteousness, and He wants us to be moved that way, not to react to the trials, but to respond to them in ways that are pleasing to Him and good for us. So He disciplines us like we are His children, which we are. And so that's encouraging to me. And then in Romans chapter 8, Paul talking to us about our sonship, if you will, he wrote these words, "For you did not receive a spirit that makes you a slave again to fear, but you received the spirit of sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father." The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his glory. So remember, as we go through these times, that there may be far more to it than being punished or disciplined in a sense. Excuse me. But rather that God's testing us to see how we're going to respond, and with the hopes that we will learn our lesson and that we will become even more righteous because he is righteous. With that, I would like to bid you a good afternoon and God bless.